On September 15, 1945, while America was celebrating its victory in World War II, Robert Franklin Harrelson, a 49-year-old man, was suffering from severe pain in his stomach while in a hospital in Alabama. Despite the doctor's efforts to save him, he died in the middle of the day. The doctors treated the death as an accidental case of food poisoning without suspecting any foul play. However, in reality, Robert was one of the victims of the infamous American serial killer, Nannie Doss, known as the Giggling Grandma, who committed dozens of crimes between 1927 and 1954 without anyone suspecting her intentions. What is the story of this woman specifically, and why was she given that name? How did she commit her crimes without anyone noticing? To learn more details, follow us as we delve into this case presented by this channel, which unveils the most complicated crimes and mysteries. Nannie Doss, born Nancy Hazel on November 4, 1905, in Alabama, had a harsh upbringing. Her father, James, was a violent and controlling man who prevented her from going to school and forced her to work on the family farm. Nannie suffered an accident in her childhood when her head hit a metal pole during a train trip, resulting in severe migraines, frequent fainting spells, and depression. During her teenage years, Nannie claimed to have been sexually assaulted by local men, but her father did not believe her, increasing her suffering in her difficult life. While other girls enjoyed their time, Nannie and her sisters lived a harsh existence, deprived of education and recreational activities, working in tattered clothes on the farm. These harsh conditions shaped Nannie's criminal personality, eventually making her one of the most notorious female killers in American criminal history. Nannie Doss and her sisters lived in complete isolation from everyone, deprived of any interaction with girls their age or going out with them, which deeply affected Nannie's psyche and contributed to the formation of her character, which would later turn her into a ruthless killer. To escape her harsh reality, Nannie often isolated herself in her room, spending her time knitting and reading her mother's romantic magazines, dreaming of the day her charming prince would come and save her from her prison. That day finally came in early 1922, when Nannie, at the age of 16, was courted by her first husband, Charlie Braggs, whom she met while working at a linen factory. They married with her father's consent just 4 months after they met, but she soon realized that her rosy dreams had not materialized, and that Charlie was not the knight in shining armor who would rescue her. Charlie was a single mother's son and lived with her in her home. Nannie did not expect to be forced to live with her mother-in-law after marriage, and quickly realized that her mother-in-law was just as controlling as her father. Instead of finding freedom and happiness in her marriage, Nannie found herself moving from her father's prison to another prison, further complicating her mental state and paving the way for her dark future as a killer. Charlie's mother was a violent and controlling figure, which made Nannie's life after marriage a continuation of the control and abuse she had experienced in her father's house. Between 1933 and 1937, Nannie gave birth to 4 daughters, which increased her burdens, especially since her husband was often absent from home, leaving her with the responsibility of raising the children and caring for her difficult mother-in-law. During that period, Nannie turned to heavy drinking and smoking as a coping mechanism for her woes. In 1927, Nannie faced new tragedies when her middle daughters died suddenly from food poisoning. Although doctors classified the deaths as accidents, some people grew suspicious, especially after Nannie collected insurance policies for the girls. Charlie, Nannie's husband, was the only one who suspected Nannie's role in the deaths of their daughters, which prompted him to flee with their eldest daughter, Melvina, leaving their youngest, Florine, in the custody of his mother. Shortly after Charlie fled, his mother died under mysterious circumstances, leaving Nannie responsible for Florine. Nannie found work in a factory to support herself and her daughter, and the following summer, she returned with Melvina to seek a divorce, which was granted quickly at the start of 1928, with Nannie obtaining custody of her daughters after the divorce. Nannie again turned to the Lonely Hearts column seeking love, where she met Robert Franklin Harrelson, who seduced her with romantic letters, and they quickly married, moving to Jacksonville, Alabama. It wasn't long before dark sides of Robert's personality began to emerge. He was an alcoholic, violent, and had a lengthy criminal record filled with violent crimes. Despite this, Nannie chose to remain with him. In 1942, Nannie's eldest daughter, Melvina, married and had a son named Robert the following year, and then another daughter after 2 years. Due to her lack of experience in caring for children, Melvina relied on Nannie to help her raise her kids. However, a tragic incident occurred when her infant daughter died mysteriously while in Nannie's care. Melvina later claimed to have seen Nannie stab the baby with a hat pin, but no one believed her, especially since she was under the influence of drugs and sedatives after giving birth, and the death was classified as accidental. After this tragedy, Nannie's marriage fell apart, and she began dating a soldier in the U.S. Army in July 1945. However, Nannie was unhappy with this relationship and asked her daughter to end it. When Melvina refused to comply, a heated argument erupted between mother and daughter. These family tensions, combined with Nannie's dark history, indicated that things would not end well and that these disputes might mark the beginning of a new phase of turmoil and mystery in Nannie Doss's life. Without hesitation, Melvina left her mother's house and decided to spend the night at her father's home, leaving her son Robert with his grandmother. The next morning, Melvina discovered that Robert had lost his life under mysterious circumstances that night. Naturally, Melvina pointed a finger of blame at her mother, especially since Nannie withdrew $500 from the life insurance policy for the little boy. But, just like before, no one believed Melvina's claims after her earlier situation was revealed. After her son's death, Nannie collected the life insurance policy for Robert, which was valued at around $2,000, money that she later used to buy her own home near Jacksonville. Nannie then began searching for the perfect partner to live with her in this lavish new home. Thus, she placed another ad in the Lonely Hearts column in the magazines. Consequently, Nannie soon connected with a new man named Arlie Lanning, 54 years old, and married him just 3 days after they met. Just like in past instances, Nannie quickly discovered that her new husband was an alcoholic and a womanizer, resulting in a tumultuous relationship that virtually began from day one of their marriage. Shortly after her third marriage, Nannie moved to Lexington, North Carolina, where she became active in the Methodist Church, managing to create a perfect image of herself as a deeply religious woman oppressed by her husband who frequently visited various brothels and enjoyed spending time with prostitutes. In 1952, Arlie died suddenly, and doctors attributed the cause of death to heart failure due to Arlie's excessive drinking habits. But the truth was that Nannie had poisoned him with rat poison in one of his meals, killing him just as she had killed her previous husband. Naturally, Nannie financially benefited from her husband's death and collected $1,500 from the insurance company, as she had hopes of obtaining the house, but was shocked to find that Arlie had left a will stating that the house would belong to his sister upon his death. Nannie gathered her belongings and drove to Arlie's parents' home, where she was scheduled to stay for a while. Shortly after her move, Arlie's house burned down, and after extinguishing the fire and completely destroying the house, investigators determined that this fire was merely an accident. The family was allowed to collect the insurance amount for the house, but the check was made out to Arlie's sister, just as he had wished. It seems this did not please Nannie, who took revenge on her late husband by killing his mother, who died under mysterious circumstances days after this incident. Nannie somehow managed to cash the check illegally before leaving North Carolina and returning to Alabama. Upon returning to Alabama, a new body appeared in Nannie's life. This time, the victim was her sister, Dovie, who was suffering from cancer and needed care. Nannie volunteered to look after her, but she died mysteriously shortly after arriving at Nannie's home. By May 1953, Nannie was in her 40s but was still on a quest to find her Prince Charming. This time, she slightly changed her strategy, refraining from placing an ad in the Lonely Hearts column as she used to. Instead, she joined a new dating service called the Diamond Circle Club. Through this service, she met Richard Morton, whom she married in Emporia, Kansas. Although Richard did not suffer from alcoholism like Nannie's previous husbands, he wasn't the ideal Prince Charming she had yearned for since her teenage years, as he was also a womanizer who would disappear for long stretches with other women. During this time, Nannie was busy taking care of her mother, Louisa, who had suffered a broken hip from a loud fall. There was no one else to care for her after James, Nannie's father, had passed away. Nannie volunteered to take her mother into her home to live with her and her husband. Shortly after moving in, Louisa began to experience stomach issues and was writhing in pain until she lost her life just a few months after moving in with Nannie. In May 1953, Richard died from poisoning after drinking a cup of coffee that Nannie made for him, into which she had slipped a lethal dose of arsenic. Yet again, no one suspected the wife's suspicious role in Richard's sudden death, and the incident was treated as a natural death. Afterward, Nannie returned to browsing the Lonely Hearts column and soon met Samuel Doss, who was 58 years old. After marrying him, Nannie moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and soon marital problems surfaced. Samuel was a conservative and religious man, unlike any Nannie had encountered before, as he forbade her from reading the romantic and detective novels she loved, from listening to the radio or watching TV with the neighbors, or even looking through magazines. Nannie realized early on that things would not work out and began to devise a careful plan to rid herself of her new husband without raising any suspicions. By September 1954, Samuel exhibited flu-like symptoms and was admitted to the hospital, where he remained for a month and was diagnosed with a severe gastrointestinal infection. At that time, his doctor suspected foul play but lacked evidence, which led him to cease his investigations, especially after Samuel's health improved during his hospital stay. On October 5th, Samuel had improved enough to leave the hospital and return home. However, less than a week after his discharge, Samuel died suddenly, prompting his doctor to suspect foul play. This curiosity led him to perform an autopsy, discovering a lethal amount of arsenic in Samuel's blood. Following this horrifying discovery, the doctor contacted the police, which quickly moved to arrest Nannie Doss for the first time, especially after it became clear that Nannie had requested the insurance company to pay out the policy on Samuel's life. Nannie was extremely cooperative with investigators and did not try to evade or deny the charges against her. She explained to the police that initially she had put some arsenic in her husband's prune cake, but the doctors managed to save his life after he was admitted to the hospital. On the second occasion, she put the poison in a cup of coffee, which resulted in his immediate death. In her confession, Nannie indicated that the reason she killed Samuel was that he constantly annoyed her and deprived her of the entertainment she was used to, turning her life into a hell in every sense of the word. She confirmed that she felt no remorse for what she had done. Details of this crime quickly leaked to the press and media, which drew attention to Nannie's multiple marriages and the mysterious deaths of her husbands and those around her, suggesting to investigators that Samuel could be merely one person in a long series of victims. Investigators retrieved the bodies of several of Nannie's previous husbands and submitted them for examination and autopsy. Traces of arsenic and rat poison were found in all the victims' remains, which implied that authorities were dealing with a true serial killer. Additionally, investigators learned that Nannie had financially benefited from every crime she committed, as she was always the one to profit from the life insurance policies of the victims. Consequently, investigators concluded that the motive behind all these crimes was financial gain. When questioned about the other victims, Nannie denied any connection to them, and even claimed not to know some of them despite having been married to them. However, when confronted with the evidence they had gathered against her, particularly the autopsy reports, Nannie laughed joyfully as she recounted each story to the investigators. Her laughter filled the interrogation room as she recounted some of the details she found amusing. In the end, she confessed to killing 4 of her husbands, her mother, sister, grandson, and mother-in-law, while denying any involvement in the sudden deaths of her sons. Despite this, Nannie Doss was charged with first-degree murder by the Department of Justice in North Carolina, Texas, and Alabama, but she was only tried in Oklahoma, the place where she committed her last crimes. Despite the vast sums Nannie was able to collect from insurance payouts, the giggling grandma claimed she did not commit these crimes for money, but was simply searching for her true Prince Charming that she had yearned for since she was a young teenager trapped on her father's farm. In her discussions with investigators, she expressed that she was greatly influenced by the romantic magazines and novels she had read during her adolescence and youth, which were her only escape from the prison she lived in. Despite her first marriage's failure, the giggling grandma did not give up on her dream, as she indicated in her confessions that at one point she was willing to do anything to realize this dream. Nannie Doss killed her troublesome husbands under the guise of searching for true love, but investigators suspected the real motive was financial gain. While Nannie justified her actions by claiming they hindered her from achieving her dream, she relished organizing her victims' funerals and personally writing the inscriptions on their headstones. Nannie attributed her behavior to a childhood head injury, claiming it affected her conduct, a point confirmed by doctors during the investigations. Investigators unearthed that Nannie had been planning to marry again before her arrest, as she was in contact with a farm owner from North Carolina who expressed gratitude for not continuing to search for mail-order brides. Nannie was transferred to a hospital for a mental health examination, revealing that she suffered from psychological issues, but she was entirely aware of her actions, making her responsible for her crimes. Nannie sought a plea deal to plead guilty to avoid the death penalty, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in May 1955. Nannie's case led to legal changes in Oklahoma, where post-mortem examinations became mandatory for any unnatural deaths. Nannie became famous as the giggling grandma due to her cheerful demeanor when recounting her crimes while in prison. In 1965, Nannie Doss died at the age of 89 after a long battle with blood cancer in the prison hospital wing in Oklahoma.